today's video we are going to run through step by step how to create your own Hidey huts for your guinea pigs. So we are going to make a triangular style of Hidey hut. These ones are nice and enclosed but have big wide entrances, so it's super easy to spy on your piggies and see them relaxing inside. All guinea pigs naturally love cozy items, and shy piggies especially will enjoy the extra shelter that a Hidey hut provides. And as well as the video, if you want to get your hands on the exact same pattern I'm using, along with a detailed set of written instructions, then I'm really excited to finally have this in the Etsy shop as the second pattern I've launched. The pattern is a digital download, so it can be printed and assembled at home, and you can find the link to the Etsy listing just down below. However, that said, you can still use the instructions in this video using a Hidey hut pattern that you've designed yourself. Before we get started, here's a quick rundown of all the equipment that you'll need. And first up, I do recommend a sewing machine for this one. I just have a Janome J324 machine. It's over 10 years old now and works just fine, so you definitely don't need a fancy model. Then you'll just need a printer, scissors and tape to print and assemble your pattern. And for sewing, you'll need sharp fabric scissors, pins, polyester or cotton thread, and a hand sewing needle. Okay, let's get started with the first step, which is choosing and preparing your fabrics. The Hidey huts can be made from up to 3 different materials, and I'll use the same name for each layer of the hut. First up is the outer layer. This is the fabric you'll see on the outside of the completed bed. For this, I'll be using quilting weight cotton, but you can choose to use fleece if you prefer. And for my Hidey, I'm actually going to use 2 alternating cotton prints. It's a good idea if you've got 2 complementary designs that you want to use in the same bed. And next up is the lining layer, which is on the inside of the Hidey and should be something soft and cozy that also wicks away moisture and piggy pee. I recommend using fleece, and I'll be using this nice light blue one. And last of all, we have the filler layers, which are layers of polyester wadding which adds bulk and structure to the Hidey. Polyester wadding, or sometimes called batting, comes in different sizes, and I'll be using the 6-ounce version. And as for preparing the materials, the wadding is good to use straight away, but for any fleece or cotton you should consider washing it beforehand, as cotton can shrink, and for the fleece we want to make sure it wicks moisture through it. Moving on, and step 2 is preparing your pattern. If you are using the printable patterns, then these are spread over a number of A4 pages. After printing, you just need to cut around the black solid line and stick the pieces together, covering over the little flaps marked "Cover Me Over." Once assembled, we'll have 1 side piece pattern and 1 square base piece pattern. Next up is using the pattern to cut out our fabrics. And in total, we're going to cut out 19 pieces. This includes 4 outer side pieces, 4 lining side pieces, 8 filler side pieces, 2 lining base pieces, and 1 filler base piece. The design of the bed and the fact that it has a double layer of wadding means we have a lot of pinning and cutting out to do here. As you put the pins in, just take care to prevent the fabric slipping or bunching up too much. And the same goes for when you're cutting around it. Sharp fabric scissors come in really useful here. Also, please remember to only cut out the actual entrance hole in 1 outer side piece, 1 lining side piece, and 2 of the filler side pieces. So with all that cutting out done, we have ourselves a big bunch of side pieces, of which 4 of them have entrance holes in, and then we also have our 3 base pieces. And in the next step, we're going to work with those side pieces with holes in to create our entrance panel. This is what we're aiming for with this step. The 2 filler layers are sandwiched between an outer layer and a lining layer with some top stitching around the hole. And to get there, we'll start by laying down a filler layer and then putting the lining layer, in my case fleece, right side up on top of it. For fleece, the right side of the fabric, otherwise known as the side we want to be visible in the finished bed, is often a bit fluffier than the wrong side. And after this, on goes the outer layer with its right side facing down to the fleece. And finally, on goes the second filler layer. All we're going to do now is pin around the entrance hole, keeping the fabrics all nicely in line with each other. On the sewing machine, we'll carefully sew around our entrance with a basic running stitch, leaving a seam allowance of around 1 centimetre. It doesn't have to be precise. The result should look something like this, and I'm going to trim back this seam a little bit so it isn't too bulky. With that done, we'll push the cotton and 1 filler layer through the entrance hole and straighten them out on the other side, in effect rearranging the fabrics into the right order. To finish our entrance, we'll do another row of top stitching around the edge of this hole, again about 1 centimetre out. To help with this, I pin all around the far edge of the side piece to hold the materials in place. The more pins, the more secure it will be, and the easier it will be to top stitch around your entrance. And when sewing it, I'm careful not to let the fabric bunch up when feeding it through the machine. Great stuff, so we finished our entrance panel and the first side panel of the Hidey hut is complete. In the next set of steps, we're going to use all of the other triangular pieces to create a Hidey shape coming out this way using the outer fabric, and a second one coming out this way using the liner. It'll make sense when it's happening. Step 5 is an easy one. Hold on to your entrance panel and grab 1 outer side piece and 1 filler side piece. With your entrance panel set down with the outer layer facing up, lay the new outer side piece on top of it, right side facing down. And as I'm using alternating patterns, I'm going to lay the contrasting one down. Then lay the filler layer on top of this, and you're going to pin together 4 layers only, the 2 new ones and the outer and top filler layer of the entrance panel. Basically, we're not touching the lining layer or the other filler layer. In fact, I will completely ignore them for the next couple of steps. Once pinned, sew on the machine to create a seam down this right hand edge. I use a seam allowance of around 1 to 1.5 centimetres, but again, it doesn't have to be exact. The next step is similar to step 5. All we're doing for this one is grabbing the 2 remaining outer side panels and 2 filler side panels. Place one of the filler panels down, and on top of this pop one of the outer pieces right side facing up. If you're doing alternate patterns like me, then this should be the one with the same pattern as the entrance piece. Then lay down the other outer piece right side down, and then the second filler piece. Just like we did with the last step, pin along this right hand edge and sew it on the machine. So we have 2 halves of a Hidey, and in this step we're just going to sew them together to make a complete Hidey shape. With the outer pieces facing each other, start pinning right at the apex here and make sure the existing seams line up as best you can. Once I've put a couple of pins in here, I move down to each corner and then work along each side from the top and bottom towards the centre. When it's all pinned securely, sew right the way across on the machine to make one continuous seam. Take care when you get to the apex bit, as the machine has more fabric to go through here, but it should be fine. The result is one Hidey shell, and if you turn it inside out, you can get a sneak peek of what the Hidey hut will eventually look like. Moving on to step 8, and this is where we create that second Hidey structure using the lining fabric. It is essentially steps 5 to 7 repeated, but working with the liner this time. So taking your hut, place it so the lining fabric of the entrance panel is facing up. On top of this, take a second lining side piece and put it right side facing down. Then put a filler layer on top of this. Pin and sew along this right hand edge to create the first seam, and after that grab 2 more lining sides and 2 more filler sides and sew these together like we did in step 6. With these 2 halves finished, we're ready to put them together, right sides facing together. Again, start by pinning at the apex and then along each side and sew this seam right the way across on the machine. At this point, I like to trim the seam allowance back a bit, but don't cut down to the very bottom of the corners just yet. Doing this helps the Hidey to have a better shape without those bulky seams in the way. And voila! Just like that, we have ourselves two Hidey hut shells, one made with the outer fabric and the other with the lining fabric. And this extra work means our completed Hidey will be totally seam free. And in the next steps, we are going to attach our base pieces, starting off with the liner one. Okay, so taking your Hidey hut, flip it upside down and position it so the lining shell is at the front of you with its entrance facing away. Then we're going to take one lining base piece and one filler base piece. These both need pinning on the bottom of the lining hut, and to help them stay together, I'm just going to pop a pin in each corner here. This is with the right side of the lining layer facing up. Then flip this square base around and place it onto our Hidey. So the right side of the lining layer is now facing down. And starting with the bottom of the entrance panel, line up the base piece at each corner and pin them in place before pinning the rest of this edge. Follow the same process with the other three sides, remembering to take out those initial 4 pins as we go. In the end, we have the base piece nicely pinned and ready to sew. So on the machine, start from the back edge and sew along. Once you get to the corner, put your sewing machine needle down, lift the foot up and spin the entire Hidey around 90 degrees. Then the foot goes back down and we continue sewing in a straight line. We're going to go right the way around and join up to where we started. Almost finished now. Step 10 is the same process as step 9, but this time we are only attaching a single lining base piece to the outer Hidey shell. Pin the lining layer with its right side facing in towards the Hidey and wrong side facing up. Go all the way around, making sure those corners line up, which should give you something looking like this. Take this to the machine and start along the back edge again, but this time more towards one of the corners. Then, just as we did before, we're going to sew the seam, turning the Hidey around at each corner. But, and this is an important but, don't join up to where you started. Instead, make sure you leave a gap of around 3 inches so we have a hole along that back edge. And before we move on to the most exciting part, I like to just trim back some of that seam allowance again around the base pieces. Not too far, just to take away some of that bulkiness. Right then, we have 2 enclosed Hideys, and I think you can probably guess what's next. Yep, we're going to push everything through that hole that we just left. This is when we are grateful for giving ourselves a larger hole, but if you did it a little too small, don't worry, it will just either require a bit more effort to turn it inside out, or if you need to, you can carefully unpick some stitches to make that hole a little bit bigger. After turning everything inside out, this leaves us with a rather misshapen looking Hidey. To get it into shape, all we need to do is poke out those corners, make sure the apex lines up at the top there, and that the seams down the side also line up. Much better, all we need to do is sew up that back seam. So I'm going to carefully fold in and pin the base fabric and the outer fabric, trying to replicate the same seam allowance as either side as if it had been continuously sewn on the machine. If you want to sew along here on the machine, that is completely fine and it will save you some time, but if you're a perfectionist and you want the seam to be invisible, then we'll do what's called a slip stitch by hand. Just take a teeny bit of fabric from either side at a time, working your way slowly across the seam, and then I usually turn around and go back to the beginning, securing the thread with some extra stitches in one place at the end. And just like that, the Hidey hut is finished. And if you've been following along and got to the end, then congratulations. The Hidey is definitely more of a challenge compared to some of the simpler beds, so well done for finishing it. And don't worry if it's not perfect, our guinea pigs tend to not be too critical of these things. And also, that's the great thing about having a pattern. You can make more and more Hidey huts, and I promise you will get better with practice. As for this one though, let's see what the piggies make of it. Right then, piggies, what's this? Wow, what is that? Phoebe is, oh, not too sure. It's different. It smells weird, doesn't it? Is it all new? Are you gonna have a look? Ooh. Wow, what's that? He actually looks to be falling asleep. He's so cozy in there. So one thing I like to do with my Hidey huts is put a waterproof pad inside. So before I put this in the cage properly, although it looks like Pedro is totally hogging it already, I will make a waterproof pad for it and use that. I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys. If you want to check out the Etsy listing for the Hidey hut pattern, then the link is in the description below. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Bye bye!